Picture this, a cave system carved into volcanic rock. Inside, hundreds of terrified Japanese soldiers and civilians huddle in darkness, convinced that the American forces outside are demons who will torture their children and devour their flesh. They've been given grenades. They've been told that death is the only honorable choice. They're preparing to pull the pins. Now imagine a single figure approaching that cave. Not a battalion, not a tank division. One man. An 18-year-old Marine who barely weighs 123 pounds. He's alone. He's unarmed, and he's about to attempt something that every military manual would call suicide. His name is Guy Gabaldon, and on July 8, 1944, on the blood-soaked island of Saipan, he's about to rewrite the rules of warfare itself. What happens next defies every principle of modern combat. One Marine, 807 prisoners, 1 day. No shots fired. This is the story of how a Mexican-American kid from the streets of Los Angeles became the most unlikely hero of the Pacific War, not by taking lives, but by saving them. East Los Angeles, 1938, the Boyle Heights neighborhood. If you're looking for where America's future begins, this is it. A melting pot where Mexican, Jewish, Japanese, and Russian families share cramped apartments and impossible dreams. Guy Louis Gabaldon enters this world on March 22, 1926. He's one of 7 kids in a family so poor that the Great Depression isn't just history, it's breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or the lack thereof. But at 12 years old, something extraordinary happens to Guy, something that will one day save 1,500 lives. The Nakano family takes him in, not through any official adoption, not through paperwork or legal proceedings, just through the simple act of opening their door to a hungry kid who needed a home. The Nakanos are Japanese-American, and suddenly young Guy Gabaldon isn't just living with them, he's becoming one of them. Imagine the scene. A Mexican-American boy sitting at a Japanese dinner table, learning to use chopsticks, struggling through his first words of Japanese. Ohayo gozaimasu. Good morning. Itadakimasu. Let's eat. Not from a textbook, not in a classroom, but from the mouths of a family who treated him like their own son. He learns more than language. He learns the unspoken rules, the way you pour tea, the importance of removing your shoes at the door, the concept of face and honor that governs every interaction. He absorbs the rhythms of Japanese speech, the respective forms of address, the subtle art of indirect communication. For years, this is his life. 2 cultures flowing through him like 2 rivers meeting, Mexican and Japanese, East Los Angeles and Tokyo, tacos and teriyaki. He doesn't know it yet, but he's being forged into a weapon, not of destruction, but of understanding. Then December 7, 1941, tears everything apart. Pearl Harbor. The 2 words that changed everything. Within 4 months, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signs Executive Order 9066. It's written in the cold language of military necessity, but its impact is devastatingly simple. Every person of Japanese ancestry on the West Coast, citizen or not, guilty or not, must be rounded up and imprisoned. Guy watches as his adopted family is torn from their home. The Nakanos, the people who fed him, taught him, loved him. They're given days to pack their lives into suitcases. Everything else, the house, the business, the life they built, gone. They're sent to Heart Mountain, Wyoming, one of 10 concentration camps scattered across America's emptiest landscapes. 14,000 Japanese Americans packed into tar paper barracks surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. In the land of the free. Guy is 17 years old when he makes his decision. He's going to enlist, not despite what happened to the Nakanos, but because of it. He speaks Japanese. He understands their culture. Maybe, somehow, he can use that to help end this war and bring his family home. In 1943, Guy Gabaldon becomes a Marine. The irony is perfect and terrible. While his Japanese-American family sits in a prison camp accused of disloyalty, their Mexican-American adopted son is putting on the uniform to fight Japan. One of the Nakano brothers, Lane, will soon join the legendary 442 Regimental Combat Team, Japanese Americans fighting for a country that imprisoned their families. History has a sick sense of humor sometimes. By March 1944, Private Gabaldon is assigned to the 2nd Marine Division as a scout and observer. His Japanese language skills have been noted. He's being prepared for something big, something bloody. Saipan. Even the name sounds like a place where men go to die. It's a volcanic rock in the Mariana Islands, 15 miles long and 5 miles wide. 30,000 Japanese troops are dug into caves and bunkers across the island, and hidden among them are tens of thousands of Japanese civilians, men, women, children, caught between two armies. American intelligence reports paint a nightmare scenario. The Japanese military has distributed grenades to families. Mothers have been taught to kill their children rather than let them be captured. Children have been trained to attack Americans with sharpened bamboo spears. The propaganda is total and terrifying. Americans are cannibals who eat Japanese babies. Marines are recruited from prisons. Capture means torture, rape, and death. On June 15, 1944, the Marines hit the beaches. Guy Gabaldon wades ashore into hell. The sound of artillery, the smell of cordite and burning flesh, the screams of wounded men. This is the Pacific War at its most brutal, a fight to the death over every yard of coral and jungle. But Guy isn't thinking about conventional warfare. He's thinking about those caves, about the Japanese soldiers and civilians hiding in the darkness, believing American propaganda as surely as Americans believe Japanese propaganda. He's thinking about what he can do that no other Marine can. He's going to talk to them. His commanding officers are skeptical. Operating alone at night? Approaching enemy positions unarmed? It's insane. It's against protocol. It's asking to get killed. Guy doesn't care. He knows something his officers don't. The Japanese aren't monsters. They're people. And people can be reasoned with. That first night, he slips away from his unit, against orders, into the darkness, towards a cave where he knows Japanese soldiers are hiding. He sits down outside the entrance, and he starts talking. Not in the formal military Japanese that American translators use over bullhorns, not in the harsh commands of the battlefield, but in the conversational Japanese of the Nakano dinner table, the Japanese of family, of home. He calls into the darkness, "I'm alone. I'm unarmed. I know you're afraid. I know what they told you about us, but it's not true. You'll be treated well. You'll get food, medical care. You'll see your families again." Hours pass. The darkness is absolute. He keeps talking about food, about safety, about the treatment prisoners are receiving. Finally, movement in the cave mouth. Slowly, cautiously, several Japanese soldiers emerge, hands raised, terrified, but alive. Guy's method works. Word spreads through his unit. That crazy Mexican kid who speaks Japanese, he's actually pulling it off. But this is just the beginning.
July 8th, 1944, Northern Saipan. By this point, the battle has pushed the remaining Japanese forces into the island's northern tip. It's a killing zone. American artillery pounds the cliffs. Japanese civilians are jumping to their deaths by the hundreds, convinced that capture means horror beyond imagination. Suicide Cliff, Banzai Cliff, names that will haunt history. Mothers throwing their babies from the rocks before leaping themselves. Entire families detonating grenades and group embraces. Old men, women, children choosing death over the Americans. The propaganda has won. Fear has won. Death has won. Except Guy Gabaldon refuses to accept this. He's learned of a large concentration of Japanese, soldiers and civilians, holed up in a complex of caves, hundreds of them, maybe more. His officers want to call in flamethrowers, artillery, the standard solution, burn them out or blow them up. Gabaldon asks for one chance, one day. Let him try. Nobody thinks he'll come back alive. He approaches the caves alone, 5'4", 123 pounds, no weapons, just his voice and his understanding. He sits down and begins the most important conversation of his life. Hours pass. He talks about the food waiting in American camps, about the medical care, about soldiers who have already surrendered and are being treated humanely. He talks about their families, their honor, their future. He doesn't demand, he doesn't threaten. He offers dignity in surrender. Inside the caves, you can imagine the debate, the fear, the confusion. Everything they've been told about Americans says this is a trap, that this small Marine speaking perfect Japanese is some kind of demon trick. But Gabaldon's voice keeps coming, patient, respectful, human. One person emerges, then another, then 10, 20, 50. They keep coming. When Gabaldon finally walks back to American lines, he's not alone. Behind him, like some impossible Pied Piper, marches a column of Japanese soldiers and civilians. 807 of them. His commanding officers can't believe their eyes. In a single day, one Marine has captured more enemy personnel than entire battalions, without firing a shot, without calling in artillery, just by talking. It's the largest single-handed capture in American military history. Captain John Schwab immediately recommends Gabaldon for the Medal of Honor, but General Holland Smith, the commanding general, downgrades it. Maybe because Gabaldon operated against orders, maybe because the method seems too unconventional, maybe because an 18-year-old Mexican-American Marine doesn't fit the image of an American hero. Gabaldon receives the Silver Star instead. It will take 16 years before that's upgraded to the Navy Cross, the nation's second highest military decoration. But the bureaucracy of medals misses the point. Guy Gabaldon has just demonstrated something revolutionary. In war's darkest hour, understanding can defeat hatred. Culture can overcome propaganda. One human voice can save hundreds of lives. He's proven that the most powerful weapon isn't always the one that deals death. Sometimes it's the one that offers life. Let's talk numbers, because in war, numbers tell stories that words can't capture. Total Japanese military personnel on Saipan, approximately 30,000. Total survivors, fewer than 1,000. Japanese civilian deaths are estimated at 22,000, by suicide, by battle, by starvation. The true number will never be known. American casualties over 3,000 killed, 10,000 wounded. Saipan was one of the bloodiest battles in the Pacific. Guy Gabaldon's confirmed captures, over 1,500 enemy soldiers and civilians. Think about that ratio. In a battle where the Japanese survival rate was roughly 3%, One Marine saved 1,500 lives. Every person he convinced to surrender was subtracted from that terrible arithmetic. Every prisoner was someone who went home after the war, someone who rebuilt Japan, someone who had children and grandchildren who exist because Guy Gabaldon sat outside a cave and talked until fear turned to trust. He didn't stop after July 8th. Throughout the rest of the Saipan campaign, Gabaldon continued his unauthorized nighttime missions, slipping away from his unit, approaching caves and bunkers, talking in that conversational Japanese that sounded like home rather than war. Late in the campaign, machine gun fire finally found him. Wounded, he was evacuated for medical treatment. But even after recovery, even after returning to duty, nothing would match the scale of what he accomplished on Saipan. Some skeptics questioned the numbers. Lieutenant Robert B. Sheeks, a Marine Japanese language officer, later called Gabaldon a relentless self-promoter. The nature of his operations, alone, at night, without witnesses, made verification difficult. But here's what can't be disputed. Multiple Marine Corps intelligence officers publicly verified his capture numbers. Colonel Walter Latour, Colonel John Schwab, Major James High. They went on national television in 1957 and confirmed what Gabaldon had accomplished. The Navy Cross citation, approved by the Marine Corps, officially recognizes his extraordinary achievements. The core truth stands. Guy Gabaldon convinced more enemy soldiers and civilians to surrender through persuasion than perhaps any other individual in American military history. In 1960, Hollywood decided to tell Guy Gabaldon's story. The film was called Hell to Eternity. They cast Jeffrey Hunter in the lead role. If you don't know who Jeffrey Hunter is, picture this: 6 feet tall, blue eyes, chiseled jaw, the kind of guy who looks like he stepped off a recruiting poster. In other words, absolutely nothing like the 5'4" Mexican-American Marine who actually lived the story. Hollywood erased Guy Gabaldon's identity and replaced it with a white action hero. They transformed his patient negotiations into Hollywood heroics, all gunfire and explosions and American swagger. They turned a story about cultural understanding into a conventional war movie where Americans win through superior firepower and John Wayne machismo. Gabaldon himself was reportedly disgusted with the film. The Hollywood version missed the entire point. It wasn't about one tough American dominating weak Japanese. It was about one culturally fluent human being bridging the gap between two sides who had been taught to see each other as demons. For decades, this Hollywood version shaped how people understood Gabaldon's story. The truth, more interesting, more important, more relevant than any Hollywood fiction, remained hidden. But Gabaldon kept telling his story. In 1990, he published his autobiography, Saipan, Suicide Island, later republished as America Betrayed. In the book, he emphasized what Hollywood had erased. His success came from treating Japanese soldiers and civilians as human beings, from understanding their culture, not just their language, from patience rather than force. He described sitting for hours outside caves, talking continuously until fear subsided, talking about food, family, safety, honor, creating space for surrender without shame, offering dignity in defeat. After the war, Gabaldon returned to civilian life, but he never forgot Saipan. He eventually moved back to the island, living there for 20 years and running a fishing business. The place where he had saved so many lives became his home. He married, had 11 children, 9 of whom survived to adulthood, and for decades he traveled to schools, veterans events, community gatherings, anywhere people would listen, to share the real story, not the Hollywood version. The truth.
There's a detail in Guy Gabaldon's story that perfectly captures World War II's contradictions, its moral complexity, its terrible ironies, its simultaneous nobility and shame. Remembered Lane Nakano, one of Guy's adoptive brothers from the family that taught him Japanese? While Guy was on Saipan, using his Japanese language skills to save Japanese lives, Lane Nakano was fighting in Europe with the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. The 442nd was composed almost entirely of Japanese-American soldiers, men whose families were imprisoned in American concentration camps while they fought for American freedom, men who volunteered to die for a country that had declared them enemies without trial, without charges, without justice. The 442nd became the most decorated unit in American military history for its size and length of service. 9,486 Purple Hearts, 21 Medals of Honor. They fought across Italy and France with a ferocity that proved their loyalty in the only currency America seemed to accept: blood. Lane Nakano survived the war and lived until April 28, 2005, maintaining contact with Guy throughout their lives. Two brothers, one by culture, one by blood, serving in different theaters, both proving that identity is more complicated than ethnicity, that loyalty isn't determined by ancestry, that America is strongest when it embraces rather than imprisons its diversity. But here's the crushing irony. While Guy and Lane risked their lives in uniform, the rest of the Nakano family remained behind barbed wire in Wyoming, prisoners in their own country, guilty of nothing except having the wrong ancestors. When the war ended and the camps finally opened, many Japanese-American families returned to find their homes destroyed, their businesses stolen, their lives erased. The government that had imprisoned them offered no apology, no compensation, just the cold comfort that they were now free to rebuild what America had destroyed. Guy never forgot this betrayal. In his later years, he became an advocate not just for his own recognition, but for the recognition of all Hispanic and Japanese-American veterans who served despite discrimination. He understood that heroism and injustice could coexist, that you could fight for your country and still demand that your country be better. So, what do we do with Guy Gabaldon's story? How do we measure a hero who saved lives instead of taking them? How do we honor someone who succeeded by breaking rules rather than following them? The military has struggled with these questions. Gabaldon's methods, operating alone, unauthorized, using cultural persuasion rather than firepower, don't fit neatly into doctrine. His success can't be replicated by simply following a manual. It required specific cultural knowledge, personal courage, and the willingness to risk everything on the belief that enemies are still human. But his influence is real. Military psychological operations personnel now study Gabaldon's techniques as teaching examples. His story illustrates principles that have become fundamental to modern counterinsurgency doctrine. Cultural knowledge matters. Language skills provide tactical advantages. Treating civilians with dignity creates strategic opportunities. Understanding enemy honor codes opens paths to resolution that force alone cannot achieve. In Iraq and Afghanistan, units with embedded interpreters who understood not just language but culture consistently reported better outcomes. The principle Gabaldon demonstrated, that understanding enemies as humans creates possibilities that seeing them only as targets forecloses, remains as valid in Fallujah and Kandahar as it was on Saipan. But let's be honest. The American military still prioritizes firepower over understanding, still invests more in weapons than in language training, still treats cultural knowledge as a nice-to-have rather than a core capability. Gabaldon's example suggests we're missing opportunities, that young Marines and soldiers with multicultural backgrounds might be our most valuable assets, that diversity isn't just a moral imperative but a tactical advantage, that the kid from the immigrant neighborhood might understand the enemy better than the generals in the Pentagon. We need to address the elephant in the room. Did Guy Gabaldon exaggerate his achievements? The skeptics make reasonable points. His operations occurred alone, at night, without witnesses. His numbers seem impossibly high. His self-promotion in later years was relentless. Lieutenant Sheeks wasn't alone in questioning whether one man could have accomplished so much. But here's what we know for certain. The Navy Cross citation, official military recognition, states that Gabaldon captured well over 1,000 Japanese civilians and troops. The Marine Corps doesn't hand out Navy Crosses for fiction. 3 Marine Corps intelligence officers went on national television in 1957 and publicly verified his capture numbers. These weren't random officers, they were the men responsible for processing prisoners, for keeping records, for knowing exactly who captured whom. Contemporary Marine Corps records from 1944 document the July 8th capture of 807 prisoners. This happened. It's in the official war record. His Japanese language skills are undisputed. He lived with a Japanese-American family for years. He spoke conversational Japanese fluently. The logic holds. Japanese soldiers and civilians did surrender on Saipan. Someone had to convince them. Gabaldon's cultural knowledge and language skills made him uniquely qualified. Could some specific details have been embellished in retellings decades later? Probably. Memories fade, stories grow. Heroes are human. But the essential achievement stands. Guy Gabaldon saved roughly 1,500 lives through cultural understanding and persuasion rather than through force. That's documented. That's verified. That's real. And honestly, in a war that killed millions, do we really need to quibble over whether it was 1,500 or 1,200 or 1,800? The magnitude is extraordinary regardless. Guy Gabaldon lived until August 31st, 2006. He died of heart disease in Old Town, Florida at 80 years old. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, the sacred ground where America lays its heroes to rest. His grave sits among thousands of others, each representing a life given in service. But Gabaldon's sacrifice was different. He risked his life, not to take others, but to save them. In his final decades, he never stopped advocating for recognition, not just for himself, but for all Hispanic veterans who served with distinction but were overlooked by history. Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa honored him at City Hall in July 2006, just weeks before his death. Multiple campaigns have sought to upgrade Gabaldon's Navy Cross to the Medal of Honor, the Hispanic Medal of Honor Society, congressional representatives, veterans organizations. All have argued that his achievements warrant the nation's highest military decoration. All have been rejected. Officially, time limitations prevent reconsidering awards. Unofficially, some suggest lingering discomfort with his unconventional methods, with the idea that a Mexican-American who operated against orders deserves the same recognition as conventional heroes. This rejection itself tells a story about which kinds of heroism America chooses to celebrate. We build monuments to the warriors who killed the most enemies. We name ships after generals who won battles through superior firepower. But the Marine who saved 1,500 lives through patient conversation, he gets a grave and a footnote. Maybe that's because Gabaldon's heroism challenges comfortable narratives. It suggests that war's greatest achievements might not involve killing at all, that cultural understanding might be more powerful than weapons, that a poor Mexican-American kid raised by Japanese immigrants might see truths that generals miss. His story doesn't fit the template of American heroism, the lone gunman, the tough warrior, the man who dominates through strength. Gabaldon succeeded through the opposite: vulnerability, patience, cultural humility, the willingness to see enemies as potential allies. That's uncomfortable. It suggests that everything we celebrate about military prowess might be less important than everything we neglect about cultural understanding.
Here's the tragedy. We know Guy Gabaldon's methods work. We've proven it repeatedly in every conflict since World War II. Cultural knowledge saves lives. Language skills create tactical advantages. Understanding enemy honor codes opens paths to resolution. We know this. And yet we keep fighting wars as if we don't. In Vietnam, we dropped more bombs than all of World War II combined.
We dominated with firepower. We counted bodies as measures of success. And we lost. Not because we lacked military power, but because we never understood the people we were fighting or the people we claimed to be helping. In Iraq, we toppled Saddam Hussein in weeks, then spent years drowning in an insurgency we didn't understand because we hadn't bothered to learn Iraqi culture, hadn't trained enough Arabic speakers, hadn't invested in the kind of cultural bridge building that might have prevented the catastrophe. In Afghanistan, we spent 20 years and trillions of dollars trying to win a war with drone strikes and night raids. Meanwhile, Taliban fighters who spoke the local languages and understood tribal dynamics slowly won the population back. Not through superior firepower, they were outgunned by a magnitude, but through cultural understanding we never developed. Guy Gabaldon demonstrated in 1944 what we keep rediscovering and then forgetting. Cultural understanding wins wars that firepower cannot. So why do we keep forgetting? Maybe because cultural understanding is harder than buying weapons. It requires long-term investment in language training. It requires recruiting diverse soldiers who bring cultural knowledge from their communities. It requires patience, sitting outside caves for hours instead of calling in airstrikes. Maybe because cultural understanding doesn't produce the same dramatic footage as explosions. A patient conversation doesn't look heroic on TV. A Marine who speaks Japanese doesn't sell as many movie tickets as a Marine who mows down enemies with a machine gun. Maybe because embracing Guy Gabaldon's approach would require admitting that our enemies are human, that the people we're fighting have honor codes we should respect, cultural values we should understand, legitimate grievances we should address. That's harder than believing they're evil and we're good. But the cost of forgetting is measured in lives. American lives, enemy lives, civilian lives caught between armies who see them as collateral damage rather than the whole point of the conflict. Let's return to mathematics one final time. Guy Gabaldon, 1,500 lives saved. But that's just the direct count. What about the children those 1,500 people had after the war? The grandchildren, the great-grandchildren who exist because one Marine chose persuasion over violence. What about the Japanese civilians who watched those 1,500 people march back to American lines unharmed, who saw with their own eyes that American propaganda about torture and cannibalism was false? How many of them made different choices because of what they witnessed? What about the Americans who didn't have to kill those 1,500 people, who didn't have to carry the moral weight of burning families out of caves or shooting civilians who charged with bamboo spears? How many Marines went home with cleaner consciences because Guy Gabaldon offered them an alternative? The ripples of salvation spread in ways we can never fully calculate. Every person saved had a story. Someone's son who became a father, someone's daughter who became a teacher, someone's mother who raised children in a rebuilt Japan, someone's father who started a business that employed others. Behind the number 1,500 stand tens of thousands of lives that exist because those people survived. Families that weren't destroyed. Communities that retained their members. A nation that had more survivors to rebuild from the ashes. This is what heroism looks like when you multiply it across generations. Here's the ultimate irony of Guy Gabaldon's story. He became a hero by refusing to be the kind of hero America celebrates. He didn't want to kill more enemies, he wanted to save them. He didn't follow orders, he broke them repeatedly. He didn't dominate through strength, he succeeded through vulnerability. He didn't impose American will, he worked within Japanese cultural frameworks. Everything about his success violated conventional military thinking. And yet he achieved results that conventional operations couldn't match. This paradox sits at the heart of his legacy. We honor him, but we don't emulate him. We give him medals, but we don't teach his methods systematically. We call him a hero, but we keep training Marines to solve problems with bullets instead of understanding. Maybe that's because truly learning from Guy Gabaldon would require revolutionary changes. It would mean recruiting and promoting soldiers for cultural knowledge, not just physical prowess.
It would mean investing billions in language training instead of new weapon systems. It would mean accepting that a small Marine who speaks the enemy's language might be more valuable than a battalion with air support. It would mean admitting that America's greatest strength isn't our military technology, it's our diversity. That the Mexican-American kids, the children of immigrants, the people who grow up speaking multiple languages and navigating multiple cultures, they might be exactly what we need for the wars of the 21st century. But that admission threatens too many assumptions. So instead, we tell Guy Gabaldon's story, call it inspiring, and then continue training Marines the same way we always have. We preserve him as an exception, an interesting anomaly, rather than recognizing him as a model for a different kind of military excellence.
On blood-soaked Saipan, where death rained from the sky and fear poisoned every heart, where propaganda had convinced thousands that capture bred horrors worse than death, where mothers prepared to kill their own children rather than let them fall into American hands, one small Marine sat outside a cave and talked. He talked about food, about safety, about honor and dignity and the possibility of seeing family again. He talked in the conversational Japanese of home, not the harsh commands of war. He talked with patience, with respect, with the absolute conviction that the people hiding in that darkness were human beings capable of reason, not demons beyond reach. And slowly, impossibly, they believed him. Guy Gabaldon proved that in war's darkest hour, one human voice speaking with understanding can accomplish what entire armies cannot. That cultural knowledge is a weapon more powerful than artillery. That treating enemies with dignity creates possibilities that violence forecloses. He saved approximately 1,500 lives. The number is so large it becomes abstract, so let me make it concrete. 1,500 mothers who held their children after the war instead of throwing them from cliffs. 1,500 fathers who rebuilt Japan instead of dying in caves. 1,500 sons and daughters who grew up, had families, contributed to their communities, lived full lives. 1,500 Americans who didn't have to live with the moral weight of killing those people. That's Guy Gabaldon's legacy. Not measured in enemies killed or territory captured, but in lives preserved and futures made possible. The boy from Boyle Heights who learned Japanese at a dinner table. The Mexican-American Marine who saved Japanese lives while his Japanese-American family sat in a prison camp. The warrior who chose words over weapons and proved that understanding could defeat hatred. His story should be taught in every military academy. His methods should be studied in every war college. His name should be remembered alongside the greatest heroes of World War II. Instead, he rests in Arlington National Cemetery, his achievements known primarily to military historians and the descendants of the people he saved. Maybe that's fitting. Guy Gabaldon never sought glory. He sought to save lives. He didn't want monuments. He wanted recognition that there are different kinds of courage, different kinds of heroism, different ways to serve your country in war. He demonstrated that the greatest warrior isn't always the one who kills the most enemies. Sometimes it's the one who refuses to kill at all. On Saipan in 1944, against every principle of modern warfare, one Marine proved that salvation is possible even in war's darkest hour. That understanding can bridge even the widest cultural divide. That one person with courage and compassion can change the mathematics of death. Guy Gabaldon saved approximately 1,500 enemy lives through individual initiative, cultural knowledge, and moral courage. That verified achievement, documented in military records and recognized with the Navy Cross, stands as testament to the power of understanding over violence. In the brutal arithmetic of war, he chose addition over subtraction, life over death, understanding over hatred. And in that choice lies a legacy worth honoring, a lesson worth learning, a truth worth remembering. The Pied Piper of Saipan walked alone into darkness and brought hundreds back into the light, not through force, but through faith, faith that even in war, humanity can prevail. That's the kind of hero we need. That's the kind of heroism we should celebrate. That's Guy Gabaldon. Remember his name.